Hey everyone, welcome back to On the Road of Recovery. Today we have Kira from Newark with us at our Licking County event. Kira's going to share her recovery story with us. Kira, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Good. All right, so we'll just get started with the beginning. How was your childhood? Can you describe it for us? Did you grow up with both parents?
So my mom was an addict. She is when she was pregnant with me, but back then they didn't kind of take custody away from moms. I don't think they even drug tested you in the hospital back then. But so she ended up having custody of me until I was about 5 years old. And one day I woke up and I was alone and I was screaming, and my mailman came and got me from the apartment. And I never saw her again after that. My grandparents took custody of me. They wouldn't let me see her. I'm not sure why. I'll get to that part later. But and so she ended up dying when I was 9. She was murdered because she was a prostitute down on the south side of Columbus. Actually, she was murdered by a serial killer who murdered 3 other women. Yeah, it was crazy. It was on the news and everything. So yeah, but I had never saw her again, and I remember begging to see the body because I hadn't seen my mom, and they wouldn't let me see it, of course, because she had been murdered. Her face had been bashed in with a rock. So that fucked me up big time. So I lived with my grandparents, and they had a lot of money, but they were very, very emotionally abusive, and we weren't allowed to express our emotions a lot. So that was kind of tough growing up with.
Can you describe the emotional abuse a little bit?
So they wanted my sister so they had their own kids. Like I said, it was my grandparents, and then my sister was adopted, and she's only a year older than me. And they had 3 other boys of their own, and so they wanted a girl, my sister, and they adopted her. But then when I came around, it was like I was an extra. They took me because they had to. They didn't really want to, and so they treated my sister like gold, which isn't her fault. I love my sister to death, but they treated me like shit. And so just I would get punished for taking the attention away from her, and just weird shit. It's hard to describe. And they just constantly put me down and made me feel like I was selfish and not good enough, and just constantly making me feel this big, you know what I mean? So
Can you talk about school? Did you feel like you fit in, or?
No, not really. So in elementary school, I had one best friend, but I was always interested in doing really bad things. I don't know why. I was always interested in people who smoked cigarettes. I started smoking in the 4th grade, and started smoking pot in the 5th grade because I was just so infatuated with doing drugs and doing bad things and partying. And about middle school was when I started hanging out with all the stoners and the bad kids. And I was really a cute little girl when I was in high school. I mean, I could have played sports and been with the preppy kids, but I just was, like I said, infatuated with doing bad things. So that's who I hung out with.
So you started smoking weed in 5th grade, and then did it get progressively worse through high school?
By high school, I was drinking all the time at parties and stuff, and then by the time I was 16 years old, that's when I started getting infatuated with doing ecstasy. And because at first it was just I was obsessed with alcohol and cigarettes and pot, but then started getting to ecstasy and coke and all those kind of drugs. But I was always oh, I'll never do heroin and I'll never do meth, and super against it. But of course that ended up going downhill. But yeah, I started partying very heavily, wouldn't come home for the whole weekend. But my grandparents were pretty strict, so I had to go to school and I had to make good grades. I actually graduated with a 4.0. Yeah, but didn't do anything with it, but yeah.
So did you go to college?
So I am a semester away from getting my associates, but that's only been something that I've done since I've gotten sober.
So no college right out of high school?
No, and they were pissed that I didn't. Very pissed.
So what did you do right outside of high school?
So when I was 15 or 16, I met my kids' father, and we were just, super hardcore in love, thought each other was the moon. And when I was 17, I got pregnant, and I ended up, this is the hard part, I ended up being 7 months pregnant, and I had gotten clean. I'd stopped doing drugs, and because I always had wanted to be a mom, that I knew that's what I wanted to be, was a mom to a bunch of kids and have a nice family. And I got pregnant, and I was 7 months pregnant. I went into preterm labor, and I didn't know anything about pregnancy or anything back then. And so when I went to labor, I didn't understand that it was a possibility that I was actually going to lose the baby. They just kept, it was at a really bad hospital that everybody talks crap about around here. And they just kept saying like, oh, it'll stop, and they were giving me shots to stop the contractions, and they kept coming back, and then all of a sudden they checked my cervix to see if it was dilated, and it was dilated 9 centimeters or whatever the full amount is. And since he was only 7 months and he was breached, they had to tilt the bed backwards so the baby wouldn't start coming out, and they had to knock me out and give me an emergency C-section. And when I woke up, the first thing I asked was, where's my baby? And he was dead. So he had only lived for a half an hour. And that's when I started getting on opiates, because I got prescribed Percocets for the C-section. So, and they gave them to me for like a month afterwards. And and that was one of the horrible parts. They let me hold the child dead in the hospital for 4 days. So I had this baby, and I was out of my mind. I mean, I'm a pretty sane, level-headed person, and I was just out of my mind for like a year over it, of course. So, yeah, it started pretty early.
So that was 17, so 18. Were you fully addicted at that point?
Yeah, so I graduated. I was like about to turn 18, so I graduated, and it was like a couple months after I graduated that I lost the baby. And then after I lost the baby, like literally a week later, I went to a party, and then I just started partying really hardcore, and I started doing like meth and Adderall and speed so I could stay up all night and party and go to raves and all kind of stuff. And within 8 to 9 months, so we were doing Percocets the entire time throughout this, underneath all of the other drugs. But about 9 months later, somebody introduced us to heroin because we were running out of Percocets, were really hard to find. That was when all the doctor shops got shut down, and somebody just said this is cheaper and it's available every day as opposed to only being available every 3 days. So.
And how are you supporting your habit?
Back then I was working. I was always very strong-willed about working. I worked overtime from the time I could start working, and I actually got out of school early when I was in high school so I could go to work during the lunch shift at a fast food restaurant, and I was about to become a manager, but obviously that stopped once I started getting addicted to drugs. But I wasn't really stealing back then, not at first, not in that first year.
So when do you think that it became a problem?
Well, it was
a manageable problem.
Right. I was about to say it was a problem to begin with, but it started to get really unmanageable about that year mark, right when we were starting to do heroin. So I didn't know it at the time, but a week after I started doing heroin, I was pregnant with my second child with the same guy, and it was getting really unmanageable at that point. We were living in a house, and it had no water, no electricity because it got shut off, and we had turned it on so many times out in the yard illegally that they had literally taken the whole electricity globe and taken I don't even know what it was, but whatever it was that you could turn the water back on with, they took that whole thing out too. So it was no running water, no electricity, and I'm staying in this house pregnant, skin and bones, and we were just starting to run out of money really bad, and heroin only keeps you well for like a very short amount of time, as I'm sure you know, so you just constantly have to have it.
Would you say that you were obsessed with the drug?
Yes, very obsessed. And I would definitely say that like my first 6 times going to treatment, I like wanted to get clean because I wanted to do the normal things in life, but I knew in the back of my head that I was still obsessed with the drug and still wanted to get high. I don't know how to describe it other than that. It, like, sounds cliche when you say it like that, but it really is true. I mean, when I really was ready to quit, I really was ready to quit.
Right. And that mental obsession is so overwhelming that It just controls your entire life.
Yep.
How old are you now?
Almost 30.
And what did you lose in active addiction?
So, I lost my grandparents, which that was kind of like a on and off relationship because they abused me, but they supported me, and it was like, I don't know, they did love me, but in their own messed up way. So, but I ended up losing their support, and we don't have a lot of family, and obviously I didn't know my dad at the time. I met him when I was like 19 or 20, I think, for the first time. And so I had my sister, and that was about it. My aunt and uncle are the only other family I had. They signed me off too. Eventually I lost my car. I lost my job because I got caught stealing and had to go to rehab. I ended up having to go to jail at 20, prison by 21. I had my third child in prison and had to send him home. That was horrible. And because of the felony, I've lost everything else in life. I mean, I got the chance to have a professional job now because they hire felons because I work with addicts. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't even be able to be hired at a gas station right now until I can get it expunged or it's been long enough, like enough years. But, um, uh, yeah, just people, places, things, lost it all.
Yeah. So during this time, did you ever feel alone? Did you ever feel misunderstood or misinterpreted, like no one else was going through the same thing?
So I am from a tiny little town. The population is only like 2,000. So a lot of people my age were actually going through it. So it's not that I felt like that others weren't going through it, but I did feel super alone, and that was one of the hugest things that like made me feel suicidal all the time was because you felt so alone and it felt so horrible. So
So you talked about your trauma, finding out about your mother's death. Have you experienced any other trauma in active addiction or even sober?
so after a year or two sober, my best friend died, and she had been my best friend since middle school. And then a year later, my kid's dad died, and he's the father of all three of them. So, and that was really traumatic. He was like, have you ever seen the movie Requiem for a Dream? It's a movie about addicts for you viewers that might not know. And at the end, this guy shoots up into this big black hole in his arm, and he ends up losing his arm. Well, my kid's dad was doing that. He had this big black abscess on his arm and was shooting up into it, and he went septic, and it was like he went unconscious because was septic and never woke back up, and he like swole up and died like 3 days later. Like normally you hear of heroin addicts overdosing. I mean, that's how my best friend died. That's how a lot of people, I mean, my high school I graduated with like 97 people, probably at least 20 to 30 of them are dead from overdosing. Yeah, so normally you'd hear of him overdosing, but of course he had to die in the most traumatic way, hospital, and I had to stare at him like that for 3 days in the hospital once again. So, and like I said, he was the father of all of them, so he had gone through the stuff with the baby with me, and it was really heartbreaking to him too. That was when he kind of went overboard. So, yeah.
Do you seek any outside help for the things that have happened to you?
So I have like AOD counseling, and which is alcohol and drug counseling, and I go to groups and stuff, and I attend meetings sometimes. But no, I don't go to any mental health counseling. I don't know why. Um, I just I don't know. I'm afraid of depression meds. I don't want them to change me, even though I probably really need them because I've always been a very depressive person. That's why I would like downers, I guess. I mean, I love to smoke pot. I was like an everyday pot smoker, and then once pot was over with and heroin was in the picture, I did heroin every day. So I've just always been really down.
So how long have you been sober now?
Almost 5 years, but like I was telling you before, the first 3 years of it, I was really like just dry drinking. I wasn't doing anything. I was really depressed, and I mean, part of that had to do with my best friend and my kid's dad dying, but it was also partly because I was just depressed and didn't want to do anything.
So let's talk about that for a second. So 3 years dry. What kind of pushed you to do something else?
So I was tired of not having enough money because I was really, really broke and my car was barely running. And so I was like starting to almost kind of sort of clean up my act a little bit then. And then my old youth group leader contacted me about my current job. And it took almost a year to finally get the job. And then now I've been working there for about 8 months.
So then you started working there, and
Yeah.
that's where things kind of.
Yeah. I help people every day, so that's therapeutic in itself. And
Right.
just so I think part of the reason that I was like dry drinking it for 3 years is because I was telling you that I didn't like going to meetings because people were really, especially back then when MIT was a little less common, people were really judgmental about it, and they would say that you're not sober if you're on MIT, and especially when you're newly sober, it's really hard to prove that you're going to stay sober on it and not abuse it. So I just like stayed away from that, and of course it was probably somewhat of an excuse, but at the same time it really wasn't. And so I just I think that I didn't have the support that I needed, and I had to seek all that stuff out myself, and as we know, that doesn't really work sometimes 'cause sometimes you need other people to help you in the beginning. So
So the last 5 years, can you describe the kind of like feelings, the first three to the last two kind of thing?
So the first three, I was really depressed. I had my hair back all the time. It was always greasy. I mean, I literally wouldn't shower for like a week at a time because I was just so depressed. I would only work like the bare minimum, and like I said in the beginning, I used to work overtime. I was always like a hardcore worker, and I would just lay in my house and watch TV. And MAT makes you a little sleepy, so it's easy to really just like fall back into that and sleep all the time. And so I just let myself fall right into it and sleep all the time, and that made me even more depressed. So, but the 2 years now, especially since I've started working this job, it has been just so wonderful. I mean, I never would have wore the color pink 2, 3 years ago because I just wore black all the time. My hair would have never been down. I wouldn't even cut it. It would be like down to my butt looking all stringy and stuff. And now I have a cute little haircut, and it's been so awesome. And I get really encouraged by my supervisors. I'm lucky to have a really good team that I work with, and they kind of keep me accountable too. And so it's been really good.
So, kind of going off of that, what do you do to maintain your sobriety now?
So, my MAT treatment, I have to have a counselor there, and we also go to groups, and then I attend meetings and stuff too sometimes. Plus, I go to meetings and groups with my clients too, so even though they're not supposed to be for me, I'm still going with them. And that actually helps in itself. Helping people helps me. I think that was one thing that really, really helped me. I think that in order to get and stay sober and be in a good state of mind, you have to help others. And that was something I didn't understand back then. I was still really young, and I was selfish, and I think I've grown up since then and became a lot less selfish. So,
And what about your relationships now? How is the relationships between your family? You talked about friends. Do you have a significant other?
yes, I have a significant other. It's good. Actually, we got together when we were still using, and we're still together. That's like a rare story. People never get clean together, but he is actually the one that pushed me to get clean. And my well, I'll go to my aunt and uncle first. They were significant people in my life. I hung out with them a lot when I was younger because they were close to my mom's age. And so I would go over there all the time whenever I could. And so now, the whole time I was using, they wouldn't let me around, and they had their one son, and I really wanted a relationship with him, and now we're like best friends. And I've been over there for about the whole 5 years I've been sober, and we're really close, and so that's awesome. And then the good story, the good part is, so my grandparents and I still have a really tumultuous relationship, but so they wouldn't let me see even when I got clean, they wouldn't let me see my kids. I left for about 9 months. Like, of course I was using before that, but I left like home for about 9 months, and they wouldn't let me come back, and then I got sober. But even after I got sober, they wouldn't let me see my kids, and this went on for 5 years, and I was just so depressed. And I was just so depressed and so down on myself, and I didn't think I could do it, and I didn't know how to file, and I didn't have the money for a lawyer. And so, but just like 3 or 4 months ago, I kept on it, kept asking them if I could see them, and they finally said yes, like 3 or 4 months ago. And then they invited me to go on to Disney with them in a camper for 2 weeks, and it was so awesome. And it was really awesome to be able to be close with my kids, because one of the things you miss the most about not having your kids in your life is like the little things, like getting to sleep with them or getting to make them breakfast, get them dressed. So I got to do all those things, and I'm about to cry again, but it was just so awesome to be there with them. My son is just like his dad, and my daughter is just like me, and I love them so much. And so now I get to see them every weekend.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. What dreams do you have that otherwise would not have been possible?
So before I started using, I always wanted to be a teacher. And obviously, after I got a felony, that wasn't possible anymore, because even if you get it expunged, you still can't be a teacher. But so I started working in the addiction field, and one of my dreams, ever since I was still using, was to work with like adolescents and younger kids in the field. And so now I'm working with CPS, and my dream really is to just rise up in the ranks there, because I have never been a person that wants to make a lot of money. I'm satisfied with the bare minimum. As long as I can afford to pay my bills and have a few comforts, I'm fine. I just wanted a family and a cozy life, so I don't mind not making a lot of money and working there.
Yeah. And what do you see for your future, your personal future?
Well, I hope that I can grow the relationship with my kids. That's one of the most important things to me. I'm kind of so my grandparents, like I said, our relationship is still pretty bad, and they're kind of like my kids don't know I'm their mom, and because they call them mom and dad because they forced them to call them mom and dad, even though that's their great grandparents. I didn't get a lot into my grandparents, but they're messed up individuals. But so that one of my goals is to help them because addiction's in your genes, and I want to make sure that as best as I can that they don't fall into the same trap. And I think the only way to prevent that is by giving them love and surrounding them with support. And so I just want to be there for them as much as possible. And I hope that as the years go on, my grandparents will let me, see them more and have them more. And but if not, when they're 18, I plan to try to be there for them as much as possible. And then my goal as far as work is just, like I said, to continue rising up in the field I'm in. And wherever that takes me, it might be at CPS, it might be somewhere else, but I want to work with kids. I know that much.
So, are you generally happier now?
Yes. I would say the first 3 years, I was kind of like in the, why bother being sober kind of field. But yeah, now I love it. I really am.
And so recently, what do you think is your favorite feeling that you get? Is it gratitude, peace, those kind of feelings?
Gratitude and humility. This experience has severely humbled me. So my grandparents, they had money, like I said, and so we were really spoiled. Even though it was really emotionally abusive, we were still really spoiled with material things. And I was really naive and really selfish, and so going through that whole experience has humbled me to the fullest and has made me super grateful and just super thankful. And I don't even know how to describe it. I just love things more.
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it. Give me an example of one thing you are proud of since getting sober.
My job, definitely. I brag about that to everybody. I mean, I know it's not that much. Working for CPS is it's not that great of a job, but to me, it's the greatest job in the world. So, and then my kids, of course.
So, what does a typical day look for you now?
A typical day, I leave early so I had to go to the MAT clinic a lot, super early in the morning, and then I come straight to work, and then I'm not home till 8 o'clock at night. I mean, last Saturday, I took one of my clients to rehab and wasn't home till 2:30 in the morning. Even though it's supposed to be a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job, here I am on Saturday taking them 3 hours away to a rehab because I would have done it even if I couldn't clock in for it.
Right. That's amazing, really. Can you share some examples of things you have been able to do in recovery that otherwise would not have been possible? The trips, for instance.
So I think working in this field is definitely something that wouldn't have been possible because had I never been an addict, like I said, I probably would have been a teacher. And, I might have been humbled a little bit by life, but not as much as I was by becoming an addict. And I used to think that if I could go back in time, I would change it, that I would never use. But I don't think like that anymore. Now I love where I'm at in life, and I love helping kids and it's really about the moms a lot, which is about the whole family. And I love spending time with the kids that, their kids that I get to hang out with. But I love helping the moms, and because I lost my kids, and that's why my youth group leader chose me for this job, was because I would be working with other moms who might lose their kids. And it really has been awesome because, I don't want that to ever happen to anyone. That has been the biggest heartbreak and still continues to be because, like I said, all I ever wanted to be was a mom and have a family, and I lost my whole family, and it was hurtful. So,
what have you learned from your addiction?
That adults were right when they told you things when you were 16, 17, 18 years old. They were right the whole time, damn it.
That's true. Do you have any words of hope that you would like to share with someone trying to get sober?
Count the small successes. Even if you used less this week, or even if you, I don't know, went to one meeting, you have to count that as a success. I continuously have to remind myself that, because sometimes I'll get down on myself, like, oh, I'm late all the time, and oh, I'm tired all the time. But then I have to count the successes. Like, I'm working this great job, and I'm staying out late to help my clients, and I just have to remind myself. And I think that's the biggest advice that I give to all the moms that I talk to is you have to count your small successes too, because if you keep being down on yourself, you're never going to get sober, and you're just either going to end up dying by overdosing or committing suicide, or you're going to end up in jail. So,
Yep. Well, that was a great advice. Really, it is. And I think we covered a lot. But did you want to share anything else, just in general, or did we kind of cover everything you wanted to go over?
I think we covered everything I wanted to go over.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Your story in particular is going to help so many people. I really think you gave such a good description of how recovery, it doesn't have to be a certain way. Like whatever gets you sober and having a better life any way possible. So I really appreciate you coming out. Really, I do. Thank you so much.